I wrote 13 novels before I sold one. Book 6, Elantris, is the first one that got published. And it's the first time where I really sat down and said, you know what, epic fantasy is really what I want to do. Let's start building something here. And so I wrote Hoyd into that book. Then I wrote a book called Dragonsteel, where I jumped back and I told his backstory on a different planet. And then I wrote something called Aether of Night a little bit later, where I delved into the kind of what had happened to some of those characters on a different planet, far, far in the future. And I started building this thing that I called the Cosmere, which was an interconnected world of all these epic fantasy stories that people were moving around behind and jumping in and out of these worlds with different magic systems and different lore, but all had kind of some fundamental rules to the way the magic worked and to where all these places had come from. Well, eventually I sold Elantris, and Hoyd was in there as a cameo, and I'd been giving a lot of thought to the Cosmere at that point. So, as Elantris was getting published, I sat down and did an outline for the MISTBORN trilogy, which I expanded to 9 books in the middle of that outline and said, what if I made this backbone series to the Cosmere, as I was then kind of officially calling it in my head. And I went to my editor, I pitched it, I talked about Adonalsium, this god who was shattered long ago, and 16 individuals took up pieces of that god, the intents of the god, like that god's honor, or that god's sense of entropy, which was called ruin, or things like this, and then went out into the Cosmere and were kind of ruling over these planets or involved in these planets or sometimes just lightly touching these planets, these 16 shards of Adonalsium, as we call them. And I grew out of Mistborn and Stormlight this idea for this large, super mega series, so to speak, behind the scenes. Part of where this came from was me knowing that as a new writer, pitching people on something that big was going to be tough. But if I could sell them a standalone novel like Elantris, that they would be more likely to try that out, or a standalone trilogy like Mistborn. So the whole goal was to have this hidden epic behind the scenes, and I wasn't even sure if I was ever going to get the chance to do more with it than just have it be cameos. You'll notice if you watch for Hoyd in the early books, they're just very cameo-ish. He briefly shows up here and there. And Mistborn 3 is mentioned by name, and you see him off in the distance. You don't even talk to him. This is because I wasn't sure if this was going to fly.